He said, I killed her and I deserved the death penalty for doing what I did to this young lady.
She was very friendly. She loved to be with her friends. She wanted to be part of it, anything that had energy.
The crime was one of the most brutal crimes that I've seen.
I never had a murder suspect, confess like that and ask for the death penalty and say it so many times.
Imagine living in a cozy small town where everyone knows each other, and suddenly a horrific murder happens in your community. Heather Steglian, a young woman with dreams of becoming a singer, became the victim of a brutal crime that shocked the entire community. Before we start, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? And let us know, are you already subscribed? Or is there something we could improve to earn that subscription? We're working hard to make this the #1 true crime channel in the world, and your opinion truly matters to us. Heather Steglian's childhood and youth remain largely unexplored periods of her biography. In 1972, she came into the world in the rural areas of Pennsylvania. Her upbringing took place in a small community where residents maintained close relationships and were familiar with each other's lives. This social environment apparently fostered her openness and willingness to trust people. The performing arts magnetically attracted her from her teenage years. While still in school, she demonstrated bright artistic abilities and inexhaustible energy. Meanwhile, the family atmosphere was becoming complicated. 1990 was marked by a crisis in her parents' marriage. The breakdown of the relationship between her parents dealt a devastating blow to her mother Susan's mental state. That same year, she received her high school diploma and dreamed of realizing her creative aspirations on the professional stage. However, her mother's psychological crisis and the absence of other relatives capable of providing support forced Susan to convince her daughter to postpone leaving.
I had just gone through a divorce, and she promised to stay with me for a year until I got my legs. And when that year was up, she made her plans and she moved.
Heather had no intention of staying in her hometown area forever, but she promised to stay with her mother until her psychological stabilization. During this period, she got a job as a waitress to provide for her own needs and to help her mother as much as possible, especially emotionally. The recovery process after the divorce lasted about 12 months. Eventually, Susan announced that she could no longer limit her daughter with her presence, recognizing her desire for a bright future, and gave her consent to leave. Heather felt completely ready for independent life and wanted to fulfill her long-held dreams. So in September 1991, she set off for Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. In this large city, she planned to develop her vocal career. For creative self-realization, Myrtle Beach might not have seemed like the most optimal choice, but there were relatively more prospects here than in her hometown, plus her friends lived here, which influenced her decision. Despite predictable obstacles, 19-year-old Heather viewed South Carolina as a strategically important direction, optimal for launching a successful professional career. She rented a small place near the coast and got a job as a waitress at a restaurant to financially support the initial stage. She dedicated all her free hours to searching for opportunities to begin her stage career, specifically looking for auditions and show programs. But the entertainment industry turned out to be oversaturated with competitors. Just like everywhere else, Heather couldn't achieve success quickly, which caused her deep dissatisfaction. After several months, she maintained unwavering determination to conquer the stage and realize her ambitions, but she faced uncompromising reality. It became clear that this would require significantly more time to establish. So the determined young woman was forced to work persistently. Now moral support became necessary for her, which she told her mother about in one of their regular phone conversations.
She wanted me to come down. She was feeling homesick and things were not going as well as she wanted it to go down there.
Naturally, the woman gladly performed all the actions her daughter needed and provided the necessary psychological help through phone contact, but she couldn't move there. Mother and daughter had previously maintained constant communication and extremely trusting relationships, and now their closeness deepened even more. However, After the next phone conversation that took place on November 4th, 1991, Heather stopped maintaining contact. Susan intensively tried to contact her, but this proved impossible. The woman assumed that her daughter might have fallen into a depressive state and stopped communicating with her surroundings, although such behavior had never been characteristic of her before. Susan understood that the girl was not alone, had sincere friends who shouldn't have left her in a difficult situation. In any case, she planned to visit soon, not knowing that at that time Heather's friends were facing similar problems. She was exceptionally communicative and active. The absence of any news from the girl for several days seemed unusual. Moreover, friends and girlfriends were also unable to contact her. After a week of silence, two friends couldn't wait any longer and decided to make sure of Heather's well-being. Driving past her rental home, they decided to visit their friend on November 11th, 1991. She hadn't responded to phone calls for almost 7 days. There was no response to knocking on the front door. This didn't seem sufficiently alarming since her vehicle was absent from the entrance. The friends knew that Heather wasn't supposed to appear at work that day. At the same time, they were aware of her difficulties, including financial instability. Therefore, Heather could have sold the car or simply driven away on it to handle business. The dwelling was locked, but one of the young men who arrived owned this apartment, so he had a key for access. As soon as they got inside, it became clear that something threatening had happened here. The room showed signs of violent confrontation, chaotically scattered objects and furniture, and moving further, they encountered a horrific discovery. In the living room on the floor lay the body of deceased Heather. The friends were stunned by what they witnessed and immediately notified law enforcement. Several police officers arrived at the small coastal apartment in Myrtle Beach who were struck by the level of cruelty of the perpetrator. At the epicenter of this chaos of scattered belongings, signs of struggle, and damaged furniture was the body of the deceased girl, which had suffered serious injuries. Judging by the condition, she had experienced severe physical violence and, probably, sexual violence. She received such a significant number of injuries that it wasn't immediately possible to determine exactly what means were used to torture her. Only the medical examiner was able to determine that Heather was killed using 3 different methods. She was killed, suffered stabs, and was eaten. In total, more than 40 separate injuries were recorded, several of which could have caused death. Some of the inflicted damage could have been done after the girl's death. The criminal clearly had no intention of leaving her any possibility for survival and seemed to derive pleasure from physical dominance. A kitchen towel was found in the victim's mouth. According to close friends, certain items were missing from Heather. Her wallet, which she constantly carried with her, was absent. The purse from which the wallet should have disappeared lay turned inside out on the floor. The camera, which the girl also regularly had with her, was not found. A television that was mounted on the wall was stolen. The car that was constantly parked in the parking lot in front of the residential complex was also missing. Usually thieves immediately shoot a victim who catches them unexpectedly and don't waste time on torture. All this didn't fit the standard pattern. Several indicators immediately became apparent that the deceased was acquainted with her killer. First, a pillow was carefully placed under her head. It remained strangely unsoiled, without bloodstains, so it seemed that the suspect placed it out of compassion or remorse for what was done. Second, they suspected rape or intimate contact had occurred by mutual consent based on the body's position. Somehow, all this escalated into brutal beating, but the reasons remained a mystery. Since no signs of break-in could be detected, it appeared that Heather allowed the killer to enter the apartment voluntarily. Obviously, she was acquainted with this person and trusted them. The first to fall under suspicion were the girl's friends and acquaintances, of whom quite a few had appeared in this city. She had a communicative personality and made new acquaintances within several months. All people from her social circle needed to be thoroughly checked. The 2 witnesses who notified law enforcement testified that Heather's circle of acquaintances had significantly expanded in recent months. There was a lot of work to study all possible involved persons. While the medical examiner performed the autopsy and recorded the injuries received by the victim, criminologists investigated the crime scene. The entire apartment resembled a scene from horror films, especially the room where the beating took place. Other rooms also contained traces, but these were left exclusively by the criminal. Apparently, after the murder, he thoroughly searched them, trying to find valuable items. Signs of cleaning were also discovered. The unknown person tried to eliminate the most obvious traces of his presence. Despite this, many of them were discovered and documented. He acted chaotically, carelessly. It seemed this could have been done by a drug addict while in an inadequate state. Primarily, criminologists were interested in the killer's biological traces, since he could have been injured while inflicting knife wounds. Unfortunately, DNA examination capabilities were limited at that time, and blood couldn't be collected. However, numerous fingerprints and footprints of the criminal were found. The most disturbing shoe print was found on the victim's clothing. This was indeed a bloody print of size 43. According to detectives, it was formed when the victim was pressed to the floor with a foot while inflicting blows. All objects used to inflict wounds couldn't be found. Only a metal lamp was found in the apartment, with which the girl received several blows before the household item shattered. She had numerous knife wounds, but her kitchen knives remained untouched. Near the body were white plastic fragments. They assumed these remained from another broken household appliance, but which one exactly remained unclear. It was also missing. According to the medical examiner, the third object used to beat the girl was an iron or something similar, heavy, with a metal flat surface. Additionally, Heather was killed with an electrical cable. Distinct marks remained on her neck. The medical examiner took swabs for analysis. It was determined that the deceased was not raped. No biological fluids were found. This confirmed the version that the killer was a person with mental problems or in an inadequate state, since the cruelty turned out to be excessive. For most detectives involved in the investigation, this case became the most horrific in all their years of work. Police reviewed photographs that the girl had taken with the stolen camera and managed to print. One might think she worked as a model. Probably. Many suitors always surrounded her, so it was worth paying attention to guys she dated after moving. Jealousy or painful breakup quite fit as a motive according to the nature of the crime. Detectives found it strange why Heather chose specifically Myrtle Beach to start her career. Here, the music and even modeling industry wasn't as developed as, for example, in Los Angeles or New York. There were fewer opportunities for self-realization. However, her mother Susan refuted these assumptions. First of all, Heather's choice was conditioned by the fact that it seemed easier to get established here. She could count on minimal support, unlike other, more popular places where she would have remained alone. Of course, for first steps in this industry, it's much simpler when there's someone to rely on. Additionally, South Carolina was significantly closer and safer than California. This was one of the key points, because Heather categorically didn't want to end her life path the way circumstances developed. The girl's mother regularly discussed future plans with her. She always planned to move forward. But she wanted to make Myrtle Beach the first step to success. As law enforcement officers suspected, within a couple of months after moving to South Carolina, Heather Steglian had many new acquaintances with guys. Now she communicated with friends of all those girlfriends and friends through whom she chose this place to move. Countless independent young men and women appeared with whom she managed to meet and become friends. Near the city was a military base, so the girl had many acquaintances among officers as well. They suspected a personal motive and hatred, so former boyfriend named Jack Norton became an obvious candidate. The deceased's mother told about him. The guy should have been considered first. The young man served at the Armed Forces base nearby. He had no criminal record. Everyone characterized him as a very positive, decent person incapable of such cruelty. These words were confirmed by everyone who was well acquainted with the couple. Jack provided a convincing alibi. During the attack period, he was on duty in another country. This data was easily confirmed from several reliable sources immediately, so Jack was excluded from the list of suspects. The second suitable option turned out to be Heather's friend named Chris Harkins. Several friends from the victim's close circle immediately stated that the girl regularly communicated with him. As far as known, they didn't have romantic relationships, but the young man often passed through the city on business related to work. During this period, Chris always stayed at his friend's apartment. He was a longtime acquaintance. Both met even before moving to South Carolina. As detectives managed to determine, the relationship between them developed calmly. There were no conflicts. Moreover, they had a mutually beneficial nature because during such cohabitation periods, the young man took on part of the apartment payment. For Heather, this was significant financial help. As it was for Christopher, such cooperation was economical compared to hotels. The guy had no motive for the crime. Besides, Chris also had a reliable alibi, and he was crossed off the list of suspects. Communicating with the deceased's mother, police learned about Robert Dolan. The man was significantly older than the deceased. He behaved inappropriately toward her. At the time of investigation, he was a captain in the armed forces and a married man. About a week before her last call to her mother, Heather complained to the woman that she had ended up at a party where Robert Dolan was also present. According to her, she got very drunk that day and suspected the man of possibly harming her while she was unconscious. This could have seemed like a serious motive.
She did tell me that she thought that she had been raped by one of the husbands of one of the guests there while she was passed out.
Heather was going to file a complaint against him with police, and this threatened him with serious problems. The motive for eliminating Heather could have been the threat of revealing compromising information about Robert, which would inevitably destroy his military career and family life. Investigators immediately paid attention to several incomprehensible circumstances. How did a girl who had barely turned 19 end up at an event with experienced military personnel, including even captains? This situation looked especially strange, considering the presence not only of officers, but also their wives. It remains unclear how military spouses could tolerate the events that Heather described. No official appeals to law enforcement were received after that evening, making it impossible to confirm these assumptions. During interrogation, Robert Dolan categorically denied both participation in the murder and any improper actions toward Heather during the party. He explained all accusations as ordinary misunderstanding, and his wife, who was nearby that evening, supported all his statements. The captain was finally excluded from the circle of suspects after fingerprint examination and thorough alibi verification. At the time of the murder, the man was performing official duties. Soon, the investigators' attention was drawn to a statement from an antique shop owner that required detailed consideration. The merchant reported visits from an unusual customer whose behavior aroused serious suspicions. The visitor demonstrated nervousness and offered to sell a camera, but the antique dealer declined the deal, wondering about the item's origin and suspecting that the client was under the influence of drugs. The merchant's intuition didn't fail. This very appeal became key in establishing the criminal's identity. Having received refusal, the stranger became furious, but mention of possibly calling police forced the aggressive client to calm down, and he left the establishment searching for another place to sell. Leaving the territory, the perpetrator didn't notice how the seller came outside and recorded his vehicle's license plate number. Turning to police, the witness provided a detailed description of the suspect. The compiled photo fit depicted a Caucasian man with dark hair aged from 35 to 40 years. Detectives' main hopes were connected with the deceased's car, which disappeared without a trace. Heather drove a 1980 Chevrolet Monza. At the time of theft, the car was 11 years old. Patrol services received detailed information to search for the vehicle. Investigators hoped that the murdered woman's transport would become the shortest path to solving the case, and their expectations were justified. After several days, a similar car was found in Florida, which is one state away from Myrtle Beach where the crime occurred. The first reason for stopping was a traffic violation committed by the driver. He was forced to stop for inspection. During ownership verification, it was discovered that the Chevrolet was registered in the name of murdered Heather Steglian. The car was driven by 38-year-old James Whipple, whose appearance matched the antique merchant's description. The man was arrested. Heather's car underwent comprehensive examination. Inside the cabin, criminologists found multiple pieces of evidence. Among them were fragments of plastic material, as well as part of an iron sole that was the murder weapon, with blood remains. Similar plastic fragments were found near the body in the dwelling. Additionally, in the car's trunk was a wooden base Comparing it with the table lamp used to strike Heather, experts established that the stand was stolen from the crime scene and belonged to this very object. In the glove compartment lay a deformed, serrated knife. Its characteristics were compared with traces of the piercing cutting weapon found on the victim's neck. Damage remained on Heather's body that perfectly matched the distance between notches on the blade. Size 43 shoe prints recorded on the floor, and the deceased's body exactly corresponded to the bloody clothing and boots that the criminal transported in the trunk. After comparing treads, experts confirmed complete match of traces with prints on the victim's body. The reasons why James kept all these incriminating evidence with him became clear after conducting a conversation with him. Despite convincing evidence, specialists decided to reconstruct fragments of the broken iron. White fragments were glued together, recreating the original housing shape like a puzzle. The reconstruction perfectly matched other parts of the household appliance. James made no attempts to deny his involvement. The man immediately confessed to the murder. He was delivered to Myrtle Beach for further investigation. From the first day, the suspect demonstrated readiness to cooperate with law enforcement and didn't refuse his given testimony. He constantly emphasized his own guilt in the committed crime. The man repeatedly confirmed the fact of Heather's murder, explaining his actions by drug addiction. His statements had the character of warnings. James repeated similar assertions to all interlocutors. Some of his statements acquired the character of aphorisms. James assumed that the girl might have savings since she worked and set aside money to achieve her dream. He knew about Heather's desire to become a singer. He expected to find something valuable in the apartment. The man planned to commit robbery to purchase another portion of prohibited substances. When the next sum of money was spent, unfortunately for Heather, her name was the first to come to his mind at that critical moment, which became a death sentence for the girl. The criminal simply appeared at her place without warning, pretending that he was looking for their mutual acquaintance and asking for help. Heather let him in through natural kindness. She didn't sense danger and paid for her trustfulness with her life. For some time, they talked about their mutual friend through whom they met. The uninvited guest supposedly was searching for him, but all this was ordinary deception to lull the victim's vigilance. As soon as a convenient opportunity appeared, James grabbed the iron and struck Heather several blows to the head. The girl fell. He took a knife, with which he struck with such force that he even bent the blade. Then he used the lamp, after which he strangled her with a cord to make sure of the victim's death. The outbreak of extraordinary cruelty resulted from his inadequate state before coming to the victim. He had used drugs, so he couldn't control his behavior. After the murder, James took everything valuable he found in the dwelling, loaded it into the car, and drove away. However, the next day, the suspect returned to the crime scene, using the stolen key. He penetrated inside and tried to destroy his traces. However, he was again under the influence of drugs, so he acted unsystematically and left even more evidence. Having completed his actions, the suspect felt pity for the girl, so he carefully placed a pillow under her head. After full confession, James Whipple demanded that the prosecutor's office petition for assigning him the most severe punishment. He insisted that he deeply regretted what was done, but this wouldn't help resurrect Heather, so the only thing he deserved was the highest measure of punishment. Not everyone who knew the man well was shocked by his act. According to testimonies of James's relatives, he had long suffered from severe drug addiction, had problems controlling aggression, which caused countless difficulties in his life. These difficulties included the breakdown of marital relations, loss of contact with his own children, and deprivation of all real estate and movable property he previously owned. Most of the items stolen from the victim's dwelling were found in his vehicle, as well as in the hotel room where the killer occasionally lived. He had already tried to sell some of these items. Immediately after committing the murder, James drove 40 kilometers from the settlement and approached an antique shop owner, wishing to sell Heather's camera for a higher price than pawn shops could offer. Later, the merchant learned about the tragedy from news reports and filed a complaint with law enforcement. This information became useful only later, since at that time the girl's death was not yet known. Subsequently, this allowed identifying James Whipple. The witness's testimony, the car's license plate number, and the compiled portrait were among the key evidence in the case against the killer. During the week needed to search for the criminal, he moved across the state border but never got rid of the incriminating material evidence that was in the car. All this was also explained by prolonged stay under the influence of prohibited substances. The arrest took place on November 14, 1991. By reaching 38 years of age, James Whipple had criminal proceedings in 4 states. He committed a significant number of offenses. Mainly, these were break-ins for theft, driving under the influence of alcohol, and petty hooliganism. Heather's murder became the most serious among all his crimes. Now he resembled a disappointed man who simply couldn't overcome his harmful habit. According to his own stories and testimonies of those around him, he began using heavy prohibited substances after their mass distribution in the 80s. In 1994, court hearings began. James Whipple was accused of first-degree murder, armed robbery, car theft, as well as a whole series of other less serious offenses. Against the background of his full confession, denying guilt would have been senseless, but he didn't try to do this either. During the trial, the defense attorney persistently fought to preserve his client's life. In particular, on August 25, 1993, mitigating circumstances were presented that testified that in the past, James had been subjected to physical and sexual abuse. However, this didn't change the decision. The jury found him guilty and proposed imposing the death sentence. The judge supported this decision, but the case didn't end there. 7 years passed, which James spent in the death row section. The defense attorney constantly filed appeals trying to review the court's verdict. The lawyer managed to achieve a repeat review of the case. The judge at these hearings overturned the highest measure of punishment. The basis was that James didn't commit sexual violence against his victim, and at the primary hearings this wasn't properly explained to the jury. Therefore, some of them could perceive this as an aggravating circumstance. Such criminal proceedings are traditionally slowly reviewed by judicial instances. The same happened in James Whipple's case. This allowed concluding an agreement between defense and prosecution in July 2003. In exchange for James's refusal of the possibility of parole, the prosecutor's office no longer planned to demand the most severe punishment for him. Currently, the criminal is sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of early release. At that time, he turned 50 years old. In his final statement, James reported that he feels terrible feelings about the committed attack and murder. He agreed that he fully deserved the assigned punishment. He declared that he regretted the suffering he caused Heather's family. The girl's mother listened to this with tears in her eyes. The woman was present at every stage of court hearings throughout all these years, as was the deceased's father. But at the final stage, the man couldn't appear. Later, he gave an interview to journalists and stated that all moments of this trial became real hell. Now, he was satisfied that his daughter's death didn't go unpunished, and the family could finally find peace. The murdered girl's mother and father said they couldn't forgive James, but they no longer felt hatred toward him, since this takes too much energy and prevents living further. It's known that until the last moment, James insisted that he deserved the highest measure of punishment. But the defense attorney believed this should be avoided. Probably, this is exactly what saved him from execution. The moral of this story is simple. We never know who is really around us. Even a calm smile can hide danger. But tragedies never happen suddenly. They begin with small things that someone noticed, but remained silent about. To prevent this from happening, pay attention to alarming signals. If you see emotional violence, isolation, sudden behavior change, aggression, don't ignore it. If you feel fear, anxiety, or aren't sure what's happening, don't remain alone. Call a support hotline. Specialists work there who will listen and help. In the United States, the National Domestic Violence Hotline operates 1-800-799-7233. You can also send a text message with the word START to 88788. If there's a direct threat to life, call 911. One call can save a life, and maybe not just yours. Thank you for not being on the Detective Brooks channel, but since you're here, it means you're ready to see the truth and maybe help change someone's life.